know what you've been through.
What is up, everyone? My name's Garrett and I like comic books. I just wanted to make this video for those of y'all who are new entering the physical comic book hobby. These are just some tips that I wish I knew back when I started collecting comic books back in 2012. These are just a few of my personal suggestions of how you can store and protect your favorite comic books in your collection. You can definitely do things like PSA grading. You can also follow a lot of procedures that museums or special collectors might use to protect and preserve extremely valuable comics. But for the most part, for someone like me, and if you're looking to just simply read your comic books, you're okay with holding the comic book in your hands, and then you just want to make sure that it's in decent condition if you ever want to go back to that comic or read it again. So step number one is you want to bag and board your comic book. So typically after you purchase your comic book from your local comic book store, they're going to ask if you want to go ahead and purchase yourself a bag similar to this plastic bag and then a board for your comic to help store it. What exactly does a bag and board do? So typically speaking, dirt, the oils on your hands, any type of sunlight, all of that is going to damage your comic. And then I think a very easy thing that typically gets damaged on the comic is the edges of the comic book. And this is not just from you flipping the pages back and forth when you're reading it. This is just simply you leaving a comic book flat on a flat surface like a desk. You might be carrying the comic book around and holding it on the edges, and that might dull or damage some of the paper edges of the comic book so it's not pristine. So the suggestion here is after you finished reading your comic, for me personally, I'll read the comic book just with my normal hands. I'm not using just gloves or anything like that. Now I'll go and slide it into the bag and board to just protect it. So typically the bags and the boards themselves are specifically designed to help preserve your comic book. Usually the board backing is going to be an acid-free substance since acid typically eats away at your comic books and the paper as well as the ink. And then something important to note, if you're trying to use your own bags and you're not buying from the comic book store, the bag itself is usually not going to be made out of a PVC material. It's going to be made of something typically like polyester. Usually you'll know too if the bag is not going to be polyester. If you just give it a quick smell, it's going to have a very plasticky type of smell. That over time is going to yellow and actually damage your comic book if you store it in there. So really quick, I'm going to show you a tip of how I actually drop a comic book inside a brand new board and backing. So usually I just use a piece of tape. This is just some Scotch tape on the side to help seal the bag. I usually take the board and slide it about halfway outside of the bag. I'll go ahead and get my comic book here. I'm gonna go ahead and slide that into the bag, not allowing the tape to touch the front cover. And then I'm gonna just kind of lightly slide this down without pushing on the top of the comic book. Let that work its way down right at the base. So I let the base of the board backing touch the bottom of the bag first, and then I usually just give it a light shake and let gravity do its thing to let the comic book fall down to the base. So then in that case, I'm not like slamming the comic book down on a surface or pushing against those edges or making any fast movements. But essentially that's how I bag and board a comic. Step number two is, what do you do with the comics after you bag them and board them? Personally for me, I used to just put them on a desk and I would just start stacking the comic books. Something like this, where you just grab a lot of comics and you just place them like this. The issue with that is over time, with 3 comic books, it's not too bad. But if you get like 10 to 50 comic books, that's when you're starting to get a lot of weight pushing down right in the middle of the comics. And you'll actually notice that you're gonna get a lot of pressure that's going to be pushed on the front side of the comic book that doesn't have that additional staple and backing. First thing is you wanna go ahead and get yourself either a short box or a long box. This one I just purchased from my local comic book store, and this is called a short box. The reason why I recommend going with short boxes over something like a long box is you can actually pick up the short box and you're not gonna like throw out your back. Comic books get really heavy over time. It's just essentially like carrying a giant amount of printer paper. You can hold 150 comic books in one of these short boxes. So this is perfect for storing the initial bit of your collection. Then it's really easy if you want to move this around your place. I know for me personally, I move my comic books around a lot in the storage space that they're in. So this makes it really easy for me. The actual short box itself is made of some really rigid and thick cardboard, and it has 2 handles on the side that you can go ahead and grab that makes transporting the short box very easy. And then you can go ahead and just take your comic books, and instead of just placing them flat which is not recommended for storing your comics. You're gonna go ahead and just place them vertically inside of the short box. A tip that someone suggested for me is when you place the comic books inside the short box, essentially following this order where I'll go with the cover, followed by the board backing with the reverse cover, and then followed by another cover. So there's an alternating order of the comic and board backing, so that alleviates some of the additional pressure on the comic books themselves. Third tip that I have is don't store your comic books in direct sunlight. This might be very straightforward, but ideally when you get your comic books in the board and backing and then within a storage box or a short box, ideally you want to store that short box in a very cool and temperature controlled area. It doesn't have to be anything high maintenance. Ideally you just want to keep it away from sunlight in any places where there's a lot of fluctuations in your temperature. If you have any fish tanks or like indoor water fountains or anything, I'd recommend keeping your comic books away from those since that increases the humidity. You don't want any of that humidity and liquid passing inside of this board and backing and getting to your comic book inside. And that's what I got for y'all today. Hopefully this video helped y'all out if you're diving into the hobby. If you like this video, I'd appreciate if you drop a like. If you have any additional questions that I didn't cover, feel free to just drop them in the comments section. Thanks for watching, y'all. Peace.
Been riding out, fueling fires again. What's this like the sixth time?